I ask unanimous consent that the following amendments be in order to be offered: Shaheen 4604, Moran 4068. I further ask there be 5 minutes equally divided between the managers of their designees, and that the Senate then proceed to vote in relation to the amendments in the order listed, with no second-degree amendments to these amendments in order prior to the votes.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, I've sat in here and I've heard some fairly hyperbolic arguments suggesting somehow that anyone who has other amendments they'd like to have considered are somehow unpatriotic or unsympathetic if they don't allow these amendments to go through. The fact is, I have no problem with either of these amendments. I will gladly not only allow a vote on, I will vote for the amendment from Senator Shaheen and the amendment from Senator Moran. I support both of them. But I would like an amendment on my vote as well. This is an issue I've been working on for 5 years. This is an issue that arose 5 years ago when a provision was slipped into the NDAA that we passed that year that I think raises some significant concerns. Working with my colleague, the senior senator from California, and senators on both sides of the aisle, have put together a proposal to deal with that language. We put that in, we got a vote on it in 2012. We got a vote on it then. 67 members of this body voted for it, including some of the people who have spoken just in the last few minutes. And so this is an issue that became a part of our law because of the NDAA 5 years ago. It's appropriate to bring this up now. Now, the senator from South Carolina moments ago made reference to an objection that I made to an amendment of his within the Senate Armed Services Committee, on which I serve and on which he serves as well. That's true. I made an objection to that because in committee we have some jurisdictional rules. There are some reasons why certain amendments aren't jurisdictionally proper within the committee. It was a reason why I didn't bring this amendment up, the amendment that I want to vote on, within committee because of a jurisdictional issue. And as with last year, I was told this year and last year, if this is an amendment you want to bring up, the appropriate time to do that is on the floor, not in committee. That's why I did that, because there are jurisdictional issues present within the committee. So again, I don't have a problem with the Shaheen amendment. I don't have a problem with the Moran amendment. I'll support both of them. All I'm asking for is to give me a vote on my amendment as well. Therefore, I ask that the consent be modified to include my amendment, amendment number 4448.
Does the senator from Arizona so modify his request?
Reserving the right to object.
The senator from South Carolina.
Thank you. Number one, I will object, and let me tell you why. The last time we had a hearing about the issue of whether or not an American citizen can be held as an enemy combatant if they collaborate with Al-Qaeda was in 2012. Since 2012, things have changed all for the worse. To my friend from Utah, your amendment should be in the Judiciary Committee. That's where primary jurisdiction exists. I'm chairman of the Crime Terrorism Subcommittee. I promise that we'll have a hearing about your idea that never made it in the NDAA, and we will see what's changed since 2012 to now. I think that is much better than having a debate on the floor of the Senate about something this important that will last 30 minutes or an hour. I would argue to the American people that the rise of ISIL has changed the game, that if you read their literature, they're talking about it's easier to penetrate America than it is to get somebody to come here. When you listen to the FBI director and the Homeland Security director, their number one fear is homegrown terrorism. So here's my view. We'll debate the substance of this later. I think the best thing we could do is to pass these two amendments. The Ex-Im Bank was brought up by Senator Schumer. Senator Shelby objected. He has every right to do so. Senator Lee came on the floor and talked about how bad idea the bank is. He has every right to do so. The idea that you have to get your amendment for these two people to go forward is what this is all about. I didn't get my amendment. I wish that we could have had a vote on the Ex-Im Bank reauthorization. It really does matter to me. I didn't get that. If I could finish my thought. So what I would suggest to you, the prudent thing to do, Senator Lee, is for us to have another hearing, because the last one we had was in 2012. Listen to the FBI director and Homeland Security Secretary and see why they feel so strongly about homegrown terrorism, and see if we can find a way to move forward. But what you and others have said, there is not one American being held as an enemy combatant today. There are thousands of people who have helped us in Afghanistan that are going to get killed if we don't do something about it. You and I will never agree on this issue, and I respect you greatly. I believe we're fighting a war, not a crime. I will never agree that because you're an American citizen, you can collaborate with the enemy and work actively with al-Qaeda and ISIL to attack your homeland and not be held under the law of war, which we've been doing for decades in other wars. I do believe in due process. The law as it is today, that if our military or intelligence community picks up someone they believe is collaborating with ISIL or al-Qaeda, someone covered as an enemy combatant, they can be held, but they can only be held if a federal judge allows the continued holding. That you do get a hearing under the habeas corpus statute, that the government has to prove that you are in fact an enemy combatant. And the last time we had this debate, it was suggested this is a slippery slope. What prevents you from going to be held as an enemy combatant if you went to a Tea Party rally? That was pretty offensive to me then. It's really offensive to me now. And the idea that somehow American soil is not part of the battlefield just blows me away. I'll yield in a minute. Yeah, okay, where's the... Let me make this real to you. And we'll have a big debate. I'd love to have a hearing. This guy here, see this guy? Anwar al-Awlaki, he's dead, thank God. He's an American citizen, head of al-Qaeda in Yemen. President Obama put him on the kill list, and we killed him. Good, well done, Mr. President. If you're an American citizen and you go to Yemen to join al-Qaeda, I hope you get killed too. And if we capture you, you'll have your day in court to argue that you're not part of al-Qaeda, that we got it all wrong, and the government has to prove that you in fact are. But if the government can make that argument, the last thing I want somebody like this to hear is, hey, you have a right to remain silent. I don't want these people to remain silent. I want to hold them as enemy combatants and gather intelligence. I don't want to torture them. I don't want to beat them up. But I don't want to put them in federal court and act like this not part of the war. I don't want to criminalize the war. I want to make sure that you have due process consistent with being at war. What Senator Lee and others are suggesting is if this guy made it to America, came back to his homeland, we shot him on the steps of the Capitol, and he survived, we'd have to read him his Miranda rights, and we couldn't hold him to find out what he knows about this attack and future attacks under military interrogation. So what you do when you go down his route or his road is you stop the ability to gather intelligence at a time we need more information, not less. So I'm not going to belabor this point anymore. As you can tell, I strongly disapprove of having this debate now without another hearing, of going down this road because so much has changed. And I hope you respect where I'm coming from. I respect your passion. I hope you respect my passion for the Ex-Im Bank. Here's the point. I didn't get all I wanted. And I'm not going to stop the process for others who have done a good thing. Now, here's what you're going to do. Because you're worried about something that's not real this moment because nobody's in custody, you're objecting to finding a solution to something that is real for the moment. And Senator Moran, it is real what you're worried about. So all I'm asking is that where we can get to yes, let's get to yes. And if you can't get everything you want because somebody is passionate on the other side, don't stop everybody else from getting what they want. That to me just makes a stronger country, a better Senate. And as you know, I respect you, but I'm never going to agree with you, ever. Because I've been a military lawyer for 33 years. What you're saying makes no sense to me. I'm sure you're sincere about it. I think it weakens the ability to defend this nation at a time we need all the defenses we can get. And I'm not suggesting you be rounded up by your government, thrown in jail, accused of being Al-Qaeda or an ISIL member, and nobody ever hears from you again. You never get a chance to speak. That's not the law, and it's never been the law. So I just plead with the senator, please, please, let's take this issue into the Judiciary Committee where it belongs. Let's have a hearing, mark up the bill in Judiciary, then we'll do whatever you want to do. Don't stop these two amendments. That's all I'm asking.
Let me also mention a couple of facts. As of 10 o'clock this morning, there were 537 amendments that had been filed. 537 amendments, which is always the case with a defense authorization bill. And I'm sure that every member that filed those amendments wanted a vote and debate on every single one of them, as is their right. But the fact is that we can't do that for a whole variety of reasons, including objections, et cetera. And so if every senator blocked every vote because his or her amendment is not being considered, obviously we would never do anything, which is why we have done so little here on this bill. And now we're talking about the lives of men who have put it on the line for the men and women who are serving. Don't we have some sense of perspective and priority here? People are going to die, I tell the senator from Utah. They're going to die if we don't pass this amendment and take them out of harm's way. Don't you understand the gravity of that? Can't you understand that your issue on extended detainee is an important one? But don't you understand these people's lives are in danger as we speak? They've been marked for death. They've been marked for death. Why do you think that General Petraeus and General Nicholson and Ryan Crocker and all our most respected military leaders say with great urgency, they say with urgency, we've got to do this because they're going to die. They're going to be killed. Doesn't that somehow appeal to your sense of compassion for these people? Doesn't it mean, let me finish. Don't you understand what's at stake here? Do you respect General Petraeus? Do you respect General Nicholson? Do you respect General McChrystal? Every one of them here has written to us and said, these people's lives are in danger, and this is a moral issue. So you're going to object because your amendment is being blocked, as so many amendments are blocked. Many amendments are blocked. If that's good or bad, I don't know. But people object. Now we're talking about a compelling humanitarian issue that is far more important than humanitarian, because we abandon these people, and you can't expect people in future conflicts or in these conflicts we're in to cooperate and help the United States of America if we're going to abandon them to a cruel and terrible death. This is a serious issue. This is not something that we like to maneuver around and what the steering committee wants and how we're going to do all these kind of things we get mired down in, and we'll have the Heritage Foundation maybe write a letter or something like that. This is a matter of life and death, and that issue and challenge is immediate. So I appeal to the senator from Utah's humanity, for his compassion, for his ability to save lives here, and let this thing go through. As the most respected military and diplomatic leaders in the world have urged us to do so, I appeal to the really life or death situation that will entail a lot of deaths if you block this legislation. And that, go ahead.
Objection is heard to the modification.
Mr. President.
Is there objection to the original request?
I object to the original request.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I've been asked by a couple of my colleagues why it is that I couldn't just have the good sense to let their amendment go through. I say, let's do it. Let's have it right now. I support the amendment. Let's vote on it right now. Let's vote on Senator Moran's amendment right now. Let's vote on mine right now. Now, the comparison has been made by my friend from South Carolina that because he didn't get his vote, because someone objected this morning to his amendment dealing with the Export-Import Bank, that I should also have my amendment blocked. Now, it's important to realize the Export-Import Bank was not created by a previous iteration of the National Defense Authorization Act. The provision that I'm objecting to here, the provision that I'm trying to address with my amendment here, was in fact created by a previous iteration of the National Defense Authorization Act. It was passed in 2011 with, I believe, far too little consideration, without the American people being aware of what they were doing, and it remains on the books to this day. The next argument made by my friend from South Carolina is an interesting one, which is that this needs more of an airing. It needs more of a hearing. He's promised me now a hearing on a Judiciary Committee which he chairs. Much as I appreciate that gesture, that isn't enough. Let me replay a couple of things. First of all, I've been working on this for 5 years. I got a vote on it 4 years ago. 67 senators, in fact, voted for it. It was removed in a conference committee. Some have said there was some confusion about why it was removed in a conference committee, but regardless, it was removed. Been trying ever since then, in subsequent iterations of the Defense Authorization Act, to get another vote on it. I serve on the Armed Services Committee, and I was told by the chairman, my distinguished colleague, the senior senator from Arizona, last year. I told him I wanted to bring it up in committee. He said, you can't bring it up in committee because there's a jurisdictional issue with the Judiciary Committee. He said, that's better dealt with on the floor. I said, okay, I'll deal with it on the floor. We got to the floor. I was blocked from offering it on the floor. It didn't happen. So this year, I was told you can't bring it up in committee. There's a jurisdictional issue. You're best served waiting for the floor for that. I said, okay, I'll wait for the floor. I brought it up again this year. Now I'm being told, I've been told by the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, the senior senator from Arizona, that we'll deal with it next year. I've been told by the senator from South Carolina that he'll deal with it at some unknown point in the future in a hearing, not a markup, just a hearing in a subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee, which he chairs. So we're talking about an issue now that was brought about 5 years ago, and I'm being told again and again to wait more. Well, this is an issue that got the vote of 67 members of our body 4 years ago. This is an issue that was brought about by a previous iteration of the National Defense Authorization Act. This is the appropriate vehicle in which to address this. Now, Mr. President, this is not a frivolity. This is not just some nicety. This is not just some parochial interest. This is a basic human rights interest. This is an interest that relates to some of the most fundamental protections in the United States Constitution. When you say that you want to lock up American citizens detained on U.S. soil without charge, without trial, without access to a jury, indefinitely, for an unlimited period of time, you are implicating, at a minimum, the Fourth, the Fifth, the Sixth, and the Eighth Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. These are very significant. And so if, as my friend from South Carolina says, that we just need to take a deep breath and deal with this another day, why does the status quo, which is insulting to the history, the tradition, the text, the context of the U.S. Constitution, why should that be the status quo? Why, Mr. President, should we wait to deal with this? Why, Mr. President, should the status quo be one that is insulting to the American people, one that is insulting to the descendants of those Japanese Americans who were interned in World War II, indefinitely without charge, without access to trial, without access to the jury system, without access to their fundamental rights under the Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendments to the Constitution, among others? Why should that status quo prevail? Why, moreover, should someone who is concerned about these issues, these fundamental human rights issues, these fundamental constitutional rights issues, why should someone who is concerned about those be maligned and accused of not caring about individuals who would be harmed about the non-passage of another amendment? Why should that person be blamed when that person, me, is willing to allow a vote on the Shaheen Amendment, on the Moran Amendment, as long as they give me a vote on my amendment, an amendment that was allowed a vote 4 years ago, an amendment that received 67 votes, a veto-proof supermajority only 4 years ago. So, having been told again and again and again, wait until next year, wait until next year, wait until the next committee process, wait until the next floor process, after a while, one begins to discern a pattern. That's a pattern that I'm discerning. There's another pattern that I discern, which is a pattern in which when you allow government to exercise a certain power, even if it might not be being exercised at the moment, eventually it will. That's why we put precautionary language within our laws. That's why we have rights in our laws. What are rights, after all? But statements of law that restrict action by the government. As Madison noted in Federalist 51, government is a reflection of human nature. To understand government, you have to understand human nature. If men were angels, we'd have no need of a government. And if government could be administered by angels, we'd have no need for these external constraints on government, on its ability to exercise power. But we've learned through sad experience, Mr. President, that when human beings get power, when they get excessive power, sometimes they abuse that power. So we have to constrain it. And it's important that we decide that we're going to constrain it before the moment arrives, lest we see another Korematsu moment, lest we see the internment of more American citizens without charge, without trial, on an indefinite basis, on the basis of mere accusations, accusations unproven, accusations untested by a jury. Mr. President, the whole reason for having a Constitution rests on this understanding, this fundamental understanding that when government power grows, when it expands, it does so at the expense of individual freedom, and it sometimes does so at great risk to the human soul, at great risk to the ability of an individual to remain free. I'm all in favor of the Shaheen Amendment. I'm all in favor of the Moran Amendment. Let's have a vote on those two amendments and on the amendment that I've proposed, an amendment that is limited, an amendment, I should note here, that would not foreclose the ability of this body down the road to identify the changed circumstances of the sort that some of my colleagues have referred to. It simply says that if the government is going to do this, there has to be a plain statement, a clear statement. It has to do so expressly. The Congress must expressly authorize this kind of action, either in a declaration of war or in an authorization for the use of military force. I don't think that's too much to ask, especially given the types of constitutional protections we're dealing with. If, in fact, we're going to call the American homeland, if, in fact, we're going to call the territorial jurisdiction of the United States of America part of the battlefield, ought we not have a declaration of war or an authorization for the use of military force that identifies it as such? I mean, after all, the precedents that we're talking about, the precedents upon which this theory is based, are premised on this idea that you have enemy combatants that become part of an enemy's fighting force, as was the case in Ex parte Curran, where you had American citizens going over to Germany, putting on a German uniform, fighting for the Germans. That was part of that war. They were enemy combatants on the battlefield. Ex parte Milligan, where you had Confederate rebel soldiers who were enemy combatants on the battlefield, fighting against the United States. So if we're going to do that, we need a declaration of war. We need an authorization for the use of military force that states so expressly. And that is the sole purpose of my amendment, and I don't think that's unreasonable. And in fact, I think that is necessary. So I'd like to get this done. I'd like to get this done today. We can get this done today. Let's have votes on all three amendments. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona.
I guess finally, I woke up in the middle of the night last night thinking about this issue. And it made me think of a long time ago when I saw a lot of brave Americans die, some of it in aerial combat. Several times I thought that perhaps I could have prevented their deaths by being a better airman or taking certain actions. And it bothers me to this day. I can't imagine how it must bother someone who is literally signing the death warrants of some people who, in their innocence, decided they would help the United States of America. I couldn't bear that burden, and I believe that what we're doing here by blocking this amendment to allow these wonderful people, as described by all of our leaders, to leave a place where death is almost certain, at least in the case of some of them, that because of some exercise that would have no immediate effect, that we're blocking this ability to save lives, I do not understand. Mr. President, I yield the floor.